Okay, TMA02. Now, quickly go through this. You can stop this when you want, but just remember that what you're looking at here is the marks for TMA02. Remember, twice as many as the one before, and the word allowance and the date it's due in, all very important. I'm not going to stop on this now, because I've only got 15 minutes on this. Right, this is a general overview of the TMA. Part 1, 800 words. You're looking at the literature research, how you find literature, how you analyse it and think about it. In Part 2, critical analysis of an issue related to professional development. And Part 3, putting you in the driving seat. Now you've got the chance to say how you would run some professional development. So let's look through these quickly. Excuse me. Now, Part 1. Drawing on your search of the literature and your tutor discussions in Section 3, and there's the activities, you've got 4 things to do here. Now, you've only got 800 words, so you're not going to be expected to do a huge amount on any of these. But firstly, you have to identify the article. Right, that's only a line or 2. Then you need to explain why you selected this article to share. And here they're asking you to use the criteria from activity 2.8 and any discussions you had in the tutor group. You're then asked to provide a critique of the article. Now, it doesn't mean it's all bad. It means you've got to say why you chose that article, why you think it's useful to you. Okay, so here you're looking at some of the difficulties, problems, things to be careful about when you're selecting an article. And here you're coming down to say, I selected this one because. Right? Relevance, you like the way it's researched, all sorts of things. You've got to explain all these though. And then finally, that's a bit separate from the rest, where you're actually looking at how you went through this process of finding the literature. Now, let me just deal with this first one up here first. The first 2, really. Now, when you start to look at research articles, trying to get me out of the way here, most good articles have this sort of structure: an abstract, an introduction, a literature review, an indication of the methodology that was used, the results, and some sort of an analysis, and some sort of claims or conclusions and recommendations at the end. Now, you can attack or consider any of these elements when you're thinking about why you chose a particular piece of research work. So you could be looking at the quality of the overview, the aims and rationale, whether the work was up to date. Now, it might be up to date, it might be relevant, it might not be up to date, still relevant. There are things to discuss there. When you look at the way they actually did the research, do you find it was valid? And remember that you're going to have 2 sorts of research, really. The empirical ones, where they've actually gone out and done research themselves, or an analysis of literature, where they've gathered in ideas. And in a sense, I think that Hiker article we looked at in TMA01 was more of that, looking at the literature. There's likely to be some literature, or there will be some literature, in with the empirical one as well, but some of them stay just with the literature. If you like, they're like meta-studies. When it comes to results, are they clear, sufficient, are there any gaps? When it comes to the discussion, and here's something you can look at, do you feel it's balanced? Have they used the literature? Have they acknowledged any weaknesses or problems? And finally, the results they come to, the conclusions, are they actually supported by the information that they've provided as evidence? And there may be something about the future, something that you might find valuable, or you might find something you're not too sure about in terms of what they're suggesting, their recommendations. Okay, so that is the first part, or the first 2 parts, where you're explaining why you've selected the articles you have. Now, in this third part, you're providing a critique of the article. So here, you're showing much more about why the article has relevance and chimes with the sort of things you're doing. Right, explaining how it contributes to your understanding of the field. So here you need to bring in aspects of things you understand and you're involved with. Now, the last part is a very different part. This is really describing your your experience, if you like, of searching. Now, I know from the discussions, lots of you had all sorts of problems with this. Well, now's the time you can make use of those problems, because it says, and you see the words I've highlighted, summarise with practical examples. So what you're doing is you're showing someone the problems you might have with researching, the useful bits, what was good about the Open University Library, what was bad about the search. I know some of you had trouble with PDF and things like that. Now, rather than tell a story, what you should be doing is giving an indication to somebody who's following you what the key things are to note. Now, you've only got 800 words, so even when you do any part of this, you're not going to be expected to do all of these. For instance, you don't have to use all of these things. Some of them are going to be valued to you. And here, you don't have to use every single thing that happened. You can pick out some key points that you think show how to conduct, or what you've learnt about conducting an effective literature search. Okay, so that's part one. Now, part two. Right, part two, in order to explore the theoretical perspectives that influence and underpin leadership of professional development, critically analyse the key issues relating to leading professional development that you have identified in your own workplace. Okay, so a few key things here first. You're looking at a professional development that happened in your organisation, or in another one, as it says here, if you weren't involved. But let's just assume you are involved, or you can squeeze this in. So you've got to pick that out. It might have been training staff up for a new course. It might have been training that was sent down to you. It might have been the way the school is trying to develop its own staff. It could be anything to do with pastoral, or it could be assessment based. It could be classroom curriculum based. It could be anything. But it's somewhere where the staff need to be developed. Now, you've got to critically analyse the way this was led and the problems that came out with the way this was led. Now, it talks about using any of the theories down here. You don't expect you to use two or more, and you may dip into several, but what you're doing is using these to try and help you understand what happened with the attempted leadership of this professional development in your organisation. Okay, a little bit at the bottom here telling you what you're expected to do, 3 readings, and associated with section 3. But you can also use other areas. Now, what I'm going to show you now is 3 theories. Now, I've just picked out 3 of these because I've got some nice visual things on them, but it could be any of them. So, here, for instance, you could use Bourdieu. Now, let's assume that the training was something to do with, I don't know, something like getting a group of people to do PSE. Now, you could look at the way it was handled by the leadership and look at how it may have been affected by this theory. For instance, this bit here, capital. Everybody brings to their field, which is a social space like the school, their own capital, their own rank, if you like, their information, their own knowledge. Now, if you don't do something properly, you could, for instance, find that people are not responding because you've been attacking their capital. Someone who is an expert in their field, you put them in, they're the only staff that can teach sex and drugs, you put them in there, and you may have undermined them. Or they may not like to teach that way. And here you can use things like field, habitus, doxa. I'm not going to go into them now, because I haven't got time, but basically, you could use that. On the other hand, you could use maybe theories of knowledge, an epistemological approach. For instance, it would be nice, you would have thought, with something like PSE to make sure that you've got good procedural knowledge, that staff have got skills. But was it done in such a way that that sort of knowledge was imparted to them? Was it unsuccessful because you were only imparting propositional knowledge? Or was it successful because you actually used the experience of the people that were there? Another thing you might want to do is look at whether in fact there was any evaluation done on the professional development. And you remember Guskey's evaluation here goes from everything from looking at the participants' reaction. Remember those forms you have to fill in on courses, the evaluation forms that very often you filled in before the course started. Or could you go down to these deeper levels where you're actually looking at the organisational change brought about by professional development or the student outcomes? Right, so what you're doing, if I go back to this question here, is you're critically analysing this event, this professional development structure or aim or whatever it was, and you're using some of these theories to unpick why it was successful or unsuccessful. Alright, so that's part 2. Now, part 3, briefly describe the staff development need in your area of work. Then, assume that you're going to lead the related professional development activity, describe what you're going to do, explain and justify. Now, just a few bits of guideline up here. I'll try and get myself out of the way. Firstly, this is your opportunity to show what you would do if you were in a position to run a staff development or professional development in your school or your organisation. It could, I suppose, no reason why not, be the one that you identified in 2 that you think was a disaster in part 2, and here you're dealing with it. So, key thing to remember, briefly describe. Don't use up your words on justifications here, just describe the need. Right, assume you're going to lead this, sorry I've spelt principle wrong, and make sure it's clear what your role is. Then describe what you would do and how you would do it. Right, make each stage of your implementation clear enough to develop in the last section, which says explain and justify your choice. Right, the approach you took. So what you're doing here, this is where you show how your ideas are related to theory. So all the theories, some of the theories or different ones that came out of the last section, section 2, you can now show that you're using them to put into practice something that you think will work. Avoid narrative description and repetition of earlier bits of part 3. Right, this is where you are showing that you understand how the theory is going to help you in your structuring of this professional development. Or, if you like, you can do it the other way around and show how what you're doing is supported by these sorts of theories. Under here you've got some indications of what you're expected to do, but I think I've actually covered this mostly here. Okay, bit of a whistle stop, but you'll be able to go back over this when you want to. Just remember, part 1 is to do with the research and the articles you're looking at, and how you found them, and what you did with them, and why you chose them. Part 2 is looking at a professional development and analysing it to say how well or badly it went, or what more likely somewhere in the middle, using the theory. And then here in this last section you're now put in the driver's seat. You've shown what was wrong, you've shown how you can analyse. Now you take all that on board, and in part 3 you show how you're going to plan something effectively, and it's supported by the theory. Okay, I'll leave it there.